Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all the people that have made this possible, to the Eaton collection team, to the speculative fiction designated emphasis here at UCR, and everyone who has been supporting this awesome initiative. I have the honor to present the panel 6, Playful Archives. And to start, we're going to start with the presentation, Reversing the Archive, or How Humans Starting Archiving Dances from Machines, from Jorge. Jorge Poveda Yáñez is an interdisciplinary researcher artist with formal training in the performance arts, social sciences, anthropology, and the law. As a Fulbright scholar, he became a teaching assistant and doctoral fellow at the University of California, Riverside, where he currently works. Jorge uses a combination of performance and theoretical research to explore the artistic, material, and philosophical aspects of digital dance, AI art, and crypto choreography. His recent mixed media performances include Anon Performance 1, We've Been Here Before, and A Queer Reggaeton Dance for the End of Our Times, presented across the US, Belgium, and France. Some of his written publications include From Humans That Move Like Machines to Machines That Move Like Humans, in Dance and Movement Research Journal. It is not dance, it's data, in the European Language Resources Association, and Dancing Someone Else Dance Through Someone Else's Body in the Dance Articulated Journal. So please, let's give an applause to Jorge.
Lovely. Let me just check that this is working. Here we go. Is this good? Can you hear me? Beautiful. Good morning, and thank you, everyone. This is going to be me working through the summary, the main ideas of this article that we published recently with my colleague and friend, Nico Valdivia, in the Conception Journal. This is entitled Reversing the Archive, or How Humans Started Archiving Dances from Machines. So my background is in choreography, performance studies, theater, and for the last couple of years, I've been working with new digital technology. I've been catching up and also incorporating different generations of technologies for the digitization of choreography. But this presentation in particular is sort of a departure from that. It's definitely a rupture in that research that I've been doing. So instead of championing the expansion of dance archives through more digital tools, including video, virtual reality, extended reality, motion capture, blockchain, and others, we are here proposing a reversal of the archive, whereby human bodies are the ones that are commemorating the ways in which machines move. This can be understood as a biophilic turn for technological development, and it's based on a consideration of the e-waste derived from ever-growing databases of dance, with the need to envision other compostable forms of movement archival. And this specific article, we were trying to study and analyze different ways of visualization and different forms of visuality. And I won't have the time to fully unpack the three of them. I'm going to focus specifically on NPCs, which is non-populated characters or non-playable characters, an aesthetic and a style that emerged in the last couple of years in social media, where it's human dancers replicating the kinetic qualities in how video game character will move. Correspondingly, this NPC aesthetic and style is here framed as a mnemotechnic tchotchke of earlier experiences of moving in the digital, and as a hint for the need to decenter human culture in the preservation of organic life at large. So I figure what I will do is show you this link. For those of you that are not so familiar with this style, I just gonna take a second to show you this. So bear with me for a second. This is from one of the most prominent social media dancers and performers working with this style, and they popularized it. So as you will see, is human dancers replicating this kind of clumsy, machinic way of moving. And it's not the machinic way of moving of any video game character. Is mostly inspired by the video game characters that are in the background, that are not populated, that you don't get to control, that don't have a user behind them. And so here we have an illustration of influencers using their body. Yeah. That's one of the core characteristics of this style. It's clumsy. It's almost like the space doesn't hold any anticipatory value as they are moving from one space to the other, right? So that is just as a reference. But of course, that we can see that style in many other iterations of choreography and dance and all sorts of videos circulated on social media. But here we are thinking of the NPC style and aesthetic through a material and perceptual consideration. So we are thinking of the emergence of this style by always keeping in mind the material, the perceptual experience of stitching images together through video games. So what is the habitus? What is the corporeal disposition as you're using your controllers and stitching images together as you are playing, right? So we are connecting that, the NPC style or aesthetic, with that material perceptual experience of playing video games. And in the article, we did a similar exercise with two other artistic forms and also styles. So we were following here Nicole Shukin and Kirby, who had connected the cinematic gaze to the slaughterhouse, which seems unassuming, but she's connecting this sequential sort of tableau vivant stitching of images together, and the slaughterhouse as this space of industrialization, but also a place where you can consume the bodies of animals is in a form of a spectacle, right? So people will pay tickets to get into the slaughterhouse just to see the quote unquote show, right? And then we are doing the similar exercise when it comes to the 20th century avant-garde movements in painting, but connecting those aesthetics to the perceptual experience of seeing images through the window of the train, right? So this was an argument that we were following from this artistic exhibition Europealia, and in that specific exhibition they were thinking of how the train, even though it was not necessarily an artistic development, highly influenced the way in which people were constructing images, right? So for instance, the cubists with this reformulation of different angles in the same image that was mimicking this sort of violent recombination of landscapes that you will see on the train. And the same with surrealists, and especially with the futurist movement, right, that was highly inspired by the speed and steam and steel that was related to the train. But because we are having this perceptual consideration, this material consideration of how these aesthetics are emerging in painting and visual arts and cinema and video games and social media, it's impossible for us to not consider the e-waste that is produced by these different generations of technological development. And this is something that is gaining some traction, especially in media and cultural studies. This consideration of the ecological devastation, right, facilitated precisely by the mineral, plastic, and chemical pollution enacted by the devices employed for digital archival. Just as an example, streaming videos from a dance archive in HD definition for little more than an hour a day contaminates 2.68 metric tons of CO2, equivalent to the CO2 emissions from 30.4 gallons of gas consumed by a vehicle. And this ecological analysis of the e-waste of technological development and media is also confirmed by scholar Alenda Shang, who is thinking here of what is the energy consumption of just putting these devices together, like all of the chemicals and all of the energy consuming processes to stabilize these forms that we use as video games, as consoles, as controllers. And so because of this e-waste, this ecological consideration, we started thinking, is there any other way? What if we reverse the situation and instead of having new and better generations of technological developments with increased accuracy to digitize choreography, is there a way to use organic forms to digitize the ways in which machines are moving, in this case, a video game character? Because it's already happening, right? We already are seeing it through the NPC style and aesthetic. And so through a speculative exercise, we started thinking of, is there a way in which other organic forms, flesh, but also corals, but also ice and tree trunks could be thought as a form of database? Could they be thought as able to storage information, and in this specific case, choreographic information? I guess we can label this as compostable hard drives. And even though that seems like a off-field idea or something quite speculative, it's already happening, right? This is something that has been discussed already in media and cultural studies, specifically in elemental media. We see this example, this illustration, the very effects of the industrialization processes, products, and pollution of the 18th and 19th centuries are documented and archived in more tangible ways through coral rings. Atmospheric nuclear weapons tests of the late 1950s and early 1960s can be identified in these marine invertebrates, as well as evidence of the Industrial Revolution, as is the Little Ice Age of the late 17th century. Daily rings in corals may also document the gradual slowing of the Earth's rotation that astronomers first postulated. Ice caps, too, contain historical records and actual genetic and gaseous materials from different geological ages. So just to say, even though this speculative exercise was done as a fabulation, at the same time, we are encountering this literature that is thinking about palpable ways in which these organic forms are already archiving information in an expanded way. So this is the end of my presentation. What I wanted to do here is to do a speculative exercise of thinking of other forms of archival of dance that somehow arrive or are paralleling the argumentation that other scholars have done in performance studies and theater, Andrea Lepecki or Diana Taylor, thinking of the body as an archive. But I guess now we are extending that argumentation to also other forms of carbon-based and organic materials. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for such a wonderful presentation. For our next presentation, we're going to have Luna Loganayagam in the presentation Possession over Present. Luna is an English PhD student at UC Davis, studying post-colonial literature and theory, the relationship between play and ritual, and maternal representations in video games. Her MA thesis, U1, Wargaming, Militarism, and Play in Far Cry 3, synthesizes histories and play with coloniality and international relationships. She heads Critical Hit, a gaming research cluster at UC Davis, and she's praying for Kingdom Hearts 4. So please, let's give an applause to Luna.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so most people that have not played the Ace Attorney video game series can recognize it for two reasons. One, the famous point followed by a bellowed objection, or that time in the first game when Phoenix Wright, a defense attorney, formally requested to cross-examine a parrot in court. Since 2001, the games in this series have been bombastic and silly, but also surprisingly critical of modern legal systems and law enforcement. The Ace Attorney series follows Phoenix Wright and his proteges across 7 games to prove framed clients innocent, unmask unlikely murderers, and lament the difficulty of an occupation saddled with corrupt, powerful opponents. The only way to win cases in such an imperfect legal system is to have an entirely new system of knowledge production and assertion. Enter Maya Fey. Maya Fey is a spirit medium for a traditional Japanese clan called the Fey clan, best known for their Kurain channeling technique. She's also Phoenix Wright's assistant in most of these games. Her ability to channel the dead, including her older sister, Phoenix Wright's dead law mentor, creates an incredible amount of just-in-time information gathering during court cases. Her body physically changes to resemble the person she's channeling, allowing the dead to speak their own testimony. Maya charges a magatama, which is this object in this bottom left corner, and teaches Phoenix to recognize psych locks, which is a game mechanic in the lower right-hand corner here, when interviewing suspects and witnesses outside of court. This game mechanic reveals that there's unknown information being kept just out of reach, and you must provide accurate evidence and arguments to best guess what these secrets are related to. These 2 supernatural mechanisms give Phoenix and Maya the unique ability to fight against evidence tampering, framing, and straight-out bribery during these cases. If the law depends on an availability of truth, more truth-telling mechanisms are inherently necessary. The Ace Attorney series, like many other deduction video games, dances between the supernatural, the logical legal, and the scientific to create warring authorities of truth through the mechanic of speculation. In these games, the spiritual and occult function as alternate ways of knowing. It forces systems, and therefore gamers playing these systems, to reconcile with incorrect interpretations, corrupt or tampered sources, and the burden of creating meaning within chaos. The player of a detective or mystery video game has a direct role in determining the ethical responsibility of what to present and not present to the law or sovereign authority. The supernatural allows for the secondary player, possibly omniscient or omnipotent, to provide evidence otherwise impossible to attain through traditional methods of deduction. And this connection between law, detective fiction, and the occult isn't new. Crime shows like Psych, Ghost Whisperer, and Medium underscore the playoff of a historical trend of intuitively based talent amidst inadequate legal systems. And often these fictional cases place the most vulnerable victims in harm's way. It's less popular to defend those who committed a real crime with little excuse. Video games like Return of Obra Dinn, Ghost Trick, and Famicom Detective Club series include magical items, impossibly serendipitous timing, and deductive reasoning that is more intuitive than it is ever logical. The tantalizing inclusion of the occult and supernatural offsets the reality of not knowing, which other shows like Unsolved Mysteries and Ancient Aliens operates on. If we don't have enough secured facts, why not entertain fiction? If you look back far enough, a number of popular mystery authors have had dealings with the occult in their own personal lives. In the mid to late 1900s, even America had a boom in theosophy and spiritualism. Perhaps most famously, Arthur Conan Doyle fervently believed in spiritualism, the belief that ghosts can be channeled through mediums and seances, and wrote extensively on this topic. While these values seem to be at odds with Sherlock Holmes' ethos, this tense relationship showcases a desire for new streams of knowledge production unbound by societal frameworks, including popular law and religion. There's documentation suggesting it isn't uncommon for large-scale police agencies and detectives in the US to hire mediums for assistance on cases, most frequently to locate a secondary crime scene or a missing body. Modern shows and video games take narrative cues from these real mystery and occult through lines, the detective fiction boom, and conventions in Gothic and fantasy literature to illustrate an ineptitude of our current truth-seeking systems. It doesn't seem to matter if it's actually fictional. If the end result is a correct interpretation, the method goes theoretically unchallenged. This works well for legal fiction like Phoenix Wright because of the speculative nature that law can present. The Alchemy of Race and Rights by Patricia Williams highlights critical legal studies, also known as CLS, as a promising avenue of social justice and an integral facet to combat legal formalism. Her approach uses storytelling, myth, and poetics to translate the complexities of Blackness in the American legal systems and in higher academia. These complexities are flattened and restrained in the law system, which operates on a chain of, quote, logically sound, unquote, arguments and precedent descending from racist and sexist ideologies. Williams pushes law as a legal fiction and a speculative system through which bodies of power must reinterpret past rulings and make decisions based on future potentialities. The power of conformity guides society to legitimize and prioritize literalism, which leads to, quote, the law becoming a shield behind which to avoid responsibility for the human repercussions of either governmental or publicly harmful private activity, end quote. Williams paints literalism as a failure to arrive at the current cultural moment, a refusal to recognize the needs of the marginalized, and an enacted privilege of titled individuals within the law system. Because imagining a new kind of law, what Sora Han could deem to be dream work or Mark Jern could call racial world making, is difficult when you're interpolated within certain value systems. CLS becomes a useful lens to parse through logics of organized power. Williams' inclusion of alchemy as a central metaphor breaks barriers of common law article form. And she uses alchemy to reveal the transformative and ever-changing nature of law, or at least how law needs to constantly change in order to best arrive at times of crisis. It also highlights the unpredictability of cases and verdicts, as well as the cultural variables that can sway a case towards certain closure. Law, similar to games, virtualizes subjects into representations with a certain set of possible options. Much like how Williams used a diary format, myth, and poetics to practice new ways of exploring topics outside their controlled legal forms, and therefore recast them to serve a new narrative, games can reinscribe intentions and decenter preset structures, or at least their interrogation can. Phoenix Wright is canonically set in what the English localizer, Janet Sue, calls, quote, an alternate universe where anti-Japanese sentiments and anti-immigrant laws were not enacted in the United States, and Japanese culture was allowed to flourish and blend into the local culture in the same manner as other immigrant cultures, end quote. As a result, the fictional legal system, cultural attitudes, and deep-seated capitalist worries of Phoenix Wright's version of Los Angeles are an amalgamation of American and Japanese attributes. While there's a strange lack of Black representation for this version of Los Angeles, this series clearly articulates discriminatory surveillance, arrest, and court bias through many framed characters. Ace Attorney is strongly ACAB, disillusioned by law and its implementations, and shows attempts to revise legal systems through Phoenix, but only once he's been disbarred for unknowingly using forged evidence. It's never ascertained whether or not he's truly guilty, but a technological version of the modern jury system, called the jurist system, is introduced and implemented in a single case throughout the series. And you can see that in the central image up there. There's the mouse, this guy here. This game mechanic allows you to determine who is guilty rather than allow the narrative progression to lead you to the truth. But the case doesn't rely on the use of this system. It relies on the use of new magical objects that can glean truth. Maya's abilities and these magical objects grant framed subjects a supernatural edge in a system that has classically underserved them, even with new technology, the jurist system. Maybe here, the occult operates something like Sora Han's dream work. So let's close with a kind of case study in Phoenix Wright's Spirit of Justice. Spirit of Justice takes place in the religious country of Curaine, ruled by a monarchy with the rare ability to channel spirits and commune with the dead via a divination seance, which is the dance that you're seeing here. A coup 10 years earlier paints the current ruling partnership as potential murderers of the previous queen, and an organized resistance made up of defense lawyers fight to allow attorneys the right to once again practice law. The divination seance is unlike channeling in that it shows the last moments of a person's death via their senses, sight, smell, touch, and taste, showcased by keywords on the screen, which you can see in the video to the right. Rafa, the daughter of the current ruling party, incorrectly passes judgment on the most superficial reading of these senses and sends countless innocents to their death. Phoenix Wright spends the game critiquing Rafa's interpretation of the divination seance, which classifies as true evidence in this court's dictatorship, and reveals that supernatural knowledge is nothing without the careful interpretation and consideration of a lawyer. What is missing from law in most Phoenix Wright games is truthful testimony, and that's satisfied by Maya's channeling technique of the dead. What's missing from the law in Curine's religious dictatorship is skillful interpretation that lacks bias and navigates toward a somewhat impartial truth. And that's satisfied by Phoenix's reading of evidence and eventually Maya's more accurate channeling technique. This symbiotic relationship between the occult and law is represented and secured by what some might call knowledge systems at odds. But as Patricia Williams indicates, we will never imagine escape from the ineptitude of our legal systems until new, untraditional modes of deduction and critique are entertained and proposed. Maya Fey, Sherlock Holmes, Elle Woods, Vincent Gambini, why not? Deductive video games are weird. They orchestrate grand mysteries that must in some way be solvable, but likewise be obscure enough to instill confusion, doubt, and suspicion. In a mode of primarily logical reasoning, dead ends are best surmounted through ghosts, intuition, and magic objects. Beginning with Phoenix's protege's games, Apollo Justice, the sidekick of a lawyer transforms from a channeler to a scientist, and then scientist to a ninja thief with hologram technology that we're nowhere close to actually getting in this timeline. The shift from occultism to forensic science to tech bro fantasies is an evolving articulation of knowledge-producing systems, but canonically, nothing has been as effective as Maya Fey's ability to raise up the dead. For those who cannot speak for themselves, this can serve as a metaphor for legal grievance and a lack of protected precedent. So I don't know. Maybe cross-examining the parrot isn't that weird after all. It did, in fact, win Phoenix's case. Thank you.
That was great, Luna. Thank you so much. Now you have one more game to add to your list, okay? And now I'm going to continue with the presentation. Let me accept all cookies, of course. So, hi everyone, I'm Nico. I'm going to be presenting this work in progress that it's been growing and growing on time. And today I'm going to have the pleasure on sharing some detail on some particular aspect of my work that I haven't had too much spaces to talk, that it's the speculative dialogues as a tool in research creation. And in this case, having Waman Poma, like Waman Poma meets Machiavelli in the game Hawk and Puma. So first of all, we don't have anyone introducing me, so I'm going to do it like really quick. I'm an award-winning Chilean game designer, ludic activist, and cultural studies researcher, and so many things in the bio. But today, like the important things, like the hats that I'm wearing in this project, is that I'm co-founder at Niebla Games. It's a small indie studio based in Valparaíso, Chile. We do board games and video games. I'm also a PhD candidate here at the University of California, Riverside in the designated emphasis of speculative fictions and cultures of science. And I'm also co-founder at Rio Junto, an art collective whose mission is being like a Latin American cultural exchange hub. And all these hats convey to like are related into this project. So I'm going to be talking about Hawk and Puma. Going to share a video that, of course, is going to have some troubles to play. We have a broken link. Let me see what we can do about this. Or I just can't pull it. This one.
Are you still doing here? You still have not downloaded Pi Adblock? You know I'm just going to keep showing up on your screen until you download it, right? Honestly, it's 2025. No.
Awesome. Thank you. This is the game. That's Jorge and Puma. Now, continue with my slide. So, I'm going to be talking a little bit about research in creation and research creation and how I approach to this like speculative approach on creation that is first in theory. In every creative endeavor, we always are going to have at least a phase of research. Like regardless what kind of making art, we ideally will have something to do. But we're going to start like with a starting drive, a first idea. Then we probably are going to move into a research work. Then we have like following steps like consolidation, testing, iterations, etc. And then the other 200% that comes like looking for funding, the production, and once you put it out there, hoping for the best, right? In research creation, this is just one perspective. I'm not trying to say like this is the only way that you can do it. Is we're starting with a research starting drive, right? Like the first step. So we have academic drives, a theoretical approach, and our own personal standpoint when we are like thinking what do we want to do. Then we have the desired outcomes in this case that in the case of Jorge and Puma, it's outreach, looking for impact and education about this like referential archive that it's the work of Puma and Puma. And then we will have the creation where I need to leverage the skills that we have, the theoretical balance, the people that we can or we want to work with, the format that we can use to express our creation. And we also are going to have like the other 200%, that it's always part of the hardest one. But we're going to have research and creation there, okay? So now, can you imagine a letter with 1,000 pages and 400 hand-drawn illustrations that never reach its destiny? I'm talking about the New Chronicle and Good Government. This is a letter written in the 1600s by the indigenous chronicler Felipe Guamán Pomada Ayala. This work was addressed to the King Philip III of Spain, denouncing the abuses of the colonizers to the indigenous peoples of the region that today we call Bolivia and Peru. And this letter was lost for centuries, until it was rediscovered by a German scholar in the Royal Danish Library in Denmark 300 years after its disappearance and by accident. And since then, it has become one of the most important and well-preserved pieces of literature of the colonial period in the Americas. So it's a fascinating piece. It's called the First New Chronicle and Good Government. It's publicly available in the site of the Royal Danish Library, so please go and check it out. It's impressive. And again, like 1,000 pages, 400 hand-drawn illustrations. Like if I have to think on doing my final papers for a seminar, like it's crazy to think about 1,000 pages. So this took around like 10 years to be written. Guamán was traveling extensively on the area. We need to think that at this time, Guamán was like, he was born on the process where the colonizers got into the Andean region. So like America is a huge continent, right? And we have the Andes, that it's a high region where the Inca were. So, and also it's important to share some nuances there because the Inca weren't just like one people. The Inca were the elites of an empire, but there you have like Quechua people, you have Aymara people, and many, many more like cultures and languages there. And Guamán was part of a noble family in the region, and he was taught by Jesuit priests, so he learned Spanish. He got the ink to write letters, to translate for the colonizers, and we know how law, talking about law again, it's one of the weapons also to impose the coloniality into the region. So when I'm thinking about this research creation process and what takes me to what I want to share about this speculative dialogue is the colonial thought that I'm not going to make justice because I just have a couple of minutes. We have like some key concepts, but and also like some of the key thinkers, but I want to stop on Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui. So if we have colonization as the event that we can point at, colonialism as an ongoing process, the coloniality as the structures that support that, and where law it's super important, and that's how we can think how useful was Guamán on one side for the colonizers to impose those laws until he realized that he was being used, and he started writing this letter to denounce the abuses to the king at that time, like thinking like the king like a godlike figure on earth, but he take the courage and he believed on himself and started writing this letter for years, writing and drawing. That's really important. And we have some key thinkers like Aníbal Quijano, Enrique Dussel, Walter Mignolo, but I want to have an emphasis, and this is an author that have inspired this research creation process, that it's Silvia Rivera Cusicanqui. She's a Bolivian sociologist that would feel like really uncomfortable with the term of like the coloniality. She always is like in the on the edge, because she is always denouncing how the coloniality turned into an academic trend, and if we don't like address the inequalities and the justice and the horrors that we're living right now, it's just like a theory to publish a couple of papers. And with this attitude that I think that it's fundamental in these terrible times, she coins and she shares like these concepts of the Cheje. Chixi. I know that it's not how would you probably pronounce it. It's not how I would too. And it's a concept of the Aymara language for spotted. And she takes this concept in the context of the Aymara culture, and she invites us to think about this in a colonial context, as instead of trying to resolve all the contradictions that we have, all of us that are sharing in this country, in this place, that it's like full of a great and ongoing colonial legacy and present history. And this spotted concept allows us to think about ourselves instead of trying to say like we're on one side or the other, or we're just like black and white, or we're just like this or that. It's to think like in not on like we're spotted and not in a gradient. It's not like we're in a gray point from black to white, or we're not like an decimals point from 0 to 1. It's like understanding that all of us have like spots of different traditions, cultures, family histories, and erased pasts that are there, even if we are not totally conscious. Like those are spots that we need to acknowledge. So it's recognize that starting contradiction. And when I'm thinking on the positionality of my work, it's like I'm from Chile. I'm from that funny-looking, long and thin country in America, an American too, but I don't have the visa. I mean, I have the visa, but we're not sure yet, because with this government, no one knows. And but I'm from America too, but in South America. The Inca were in Peru, Bolivia, part of Ecuador, the north of Chile, but I grew up here in Patagonia, pretty far from the Andean region. I grew up listening to Andean music, but it's not like a place where I'm like really close. So there's of course tensions on my own positionality when working with a work like this. So when the archive turns into like the universal that all of us can use like whatever we want, or when we need to acknowledge those tensions. My ethical political standpoint, kind of you get it now, and I'm standing against the myth of the solo dev that happens a lot in game development, where we have like this myth of the person that created this game by themselves, instead of like recognizing the unrecognized labor of many people in the process, even like the initial feedback. We can discuss that a lot. So in this research creation process, there's like 3 things that are key in this process on thinking on Hoken Puma. Is the ink, the tool that Woman was using as a resistance after like he was used to translate these legal documents. He used it to denounce the abuses. So there's like part of the coloniality there, and I really engage in a speculative way with the ink during this work. The weaving, that it's a practice that Woman wrote extensively about, again, for its significance to the Andean culture till this day, and how the colonizers attacked this practice, like on purpose, to dismantle the community. And pixels as the materiality, instead of just thinking on the light, it's like how that light is projected and where those materials of our screens are brought, at what price, and all the colonial structures that are still ongoing there. And in this process, also, I encountered this like fascinating figure while like having like a playful approach to the archive of Woman. Then I Like I encountered like the prince at the same time. It was fascinating on having like these two figures together. First, Machiavelli died only a few years before Woman's probable birth. So it's crazy. Like those figures are kind of a similar linear timeline, although like they belong to really different like time paradigms. Both wrote about power, good governance, religion, and sovereignty. Okay, so we have the New Chronicle and good government, this letter, and we have the Prince, that it's also about good governance. And we have Woman that wrote to the King of Spain, Philip III, and Machiavelli wrote to Lorenzo de Medici, so to the Prince of Florence. So both are addressing their work to the crown, to a royal figure, and both are emblematic of major historical, political, and cultural transformations, like the colonization in the case of Woman, and the Renaissance in the case of Machiavelli. So the tensions in play through this speculative dialogue, I was able to acknowledge my own tension when dealing with this approach, with this work, and trying to do it in a respectful way. And the speculative fiction was the tool used consciously through this research creation approach on how to deal with my own positionality, my own history when dealing with this work, and these own works by themselves, and putting in dialogue through this technique or approach. So we have like this idea of the cheche put in dialogue on, instead of trying to just like create an idea of a soft story, there's always like contradictions and conflict. We encounter this figure in the game, so go and play it. It's just 15 minutes and it's free. You are going to encounter this figure that it's called Maki, that it's a direct reference to Niccolo Machiavelli. Not everyone get it, but if you do the hard job on reading the description below the game, you're going to know that that's Machiavelli. So it's like a specter that came with the others to this place, and he serves like this interlocutor where they're having conversations, and Waman is going on his journey to try to write, draw, and deliver his message while he's being like constantly questioned by this Machiavellic figure, like, why are you doing this? Look for the arms, and like many things that reference also are direct references to the prince and direct references to the New Chronicle and Good Government. And the critical positionality, like from a decolonial perspective, engaging with Woman becomes a speculative proposal where the tensions between indigenous and Western worldviews is not resolved through harmonious dialogue, but through confrontation that reveals the fractures of history and politics. So Machiavelli even said like explicitly that colonization was like a great tool because the only ones that lose are the colonized. So but he also had this like realpolitik attitude where he's writing the letter to advise the people that tortured him for weeks at the same time. So it's like, okay, now he's speaking with the colonized, but he's giving the same Western advice through this speculative encounter in Hakenpool. And just to start closing, I use these tools. Bitsy, it's awesome, it's beautiful, it's free, it's super simple. It's an open source tool made by Adam Ledoux. Go and use it. There's like, since it's open source, there's many people in the community that created awesome tools that allowed me to take Woman's illustrations and turn them into these playable scenes and pixels that also have like this kind of pixelated, weavy feeling that was like really great for the resonance of the whole process. And I also collaborated with members of the Ñaupañan community, with Kenneth Chavez Caguana, Cesar Sicos Yucra or ISPU, and Jessica Sicos Yucra. This allows us to translate the game into Quechua. So now we have, sorry, you want to, okay. So we were able to translate the game into Quechua. So that's one of the most powerful things that became with this game. And also this project allows us to continue with a collaboration with the Cusicausay Andean Association in Peru, in the Sacred Valley of the Incas, which turned into a further collaboration in the Sacred Valley, where we started doing ludic workshops in a project I co-founded with Kenya Chavez Caguana, that it's called Anden Futures, where I teach indigenous and local youth how to create video games using open source tools there in the Sacred Valley. So instead of just trying to speculate speculate like from my own position now here in the US, and like it's like how we can actively also use these tools and the ideas that turns from these dialogues and speculations into like also active actions where they can do whatever they want. It's not like, oh, you should tell the story that I want to. We are inviting them, but it's an ongoing starting process. Here you can have some of the starting projects that we have been doing. They wanted to depict like some like the classical violence depictions in games for stereotypes, some like trying to experiment. And here we have some of the examples of the ones that added like some alpacas or llamas, some like the sun figure that it's super important, like the apus or the hills, like that are the ancestors and the sacred hills at the same time, and like local elements. That was like great. That's just the first time. It's the pilot project, but we're going to continue. And thank you so much. It's free on each in case that you want to check it out. Now we have 20 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much. I learned so much from all of these. And it was really interesting to see a presentation about the development of a game, and then a sort of another presentation that's more of a textual analysis. I'm going to use those words because my question is about what is the method in this field, because I don't know. When we learned about the lawyer, the occult lawyer, I noticed that, in other presentations this weekend, and there's a strong sense of authorship. Like authors are really attended to think about their strategies and techniques and what they're intended and stuff like that. And even when you brought in Conan Doyle, right, there's this like figure there. And then in this other presentation, we talked about the myth of the solo authorship in this field of game development. And so knowing nothing about the lawyer game, I'm like, well, where did this come from? And so I guess my question is, what becomes important then if authorship falls away in this field because of certain production conditions? Like, where are the places of production and distribution that you feel like you have to really attend to understand how these texts function, if I'm right in reading that authorship becomes less important? Does that make sense?
It is? Okay, it took a second. Okay, so I don't know. Video games are really weird to study. They're really hard. I would say for people that study video games, the bigger the company is and the production is, the harder it can be to figure out what the authorial intent is, unless the person heading the development of that game is famous. So Hideo Kojima for Metal Gear series, or like Tetsuya Nomura for Kingdom Hearts, or we know these names because they're like they have this aura, I guess, as authors in the same way that very famous fiction authors do in literature, or directors do in film. But what I find really interesting about Japanese video games, which is one of my focuses in my research, is there's a kind of, the translation is more than just words. The translation is also sometimes cultural values. Sometimes it's what's not spoken. And what I love about Ace Attorney is we have a localizer who, I think this is the only time I've ever heard a localizer explicitly say they have a new headcanon on something they didn't officially create. And they've posited a very political lens on top of the artifact. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, so these games in Japanese are a different political artifact than they are when they are in English, because of a localizer's intention and what she was envisioning when she made this game. So I don't have a neat answer, even just for this game, I guess, because I think it becomes, when you localize things, it becomes different texts. And maybe in some ways, this is adjacent to like the screening last night. One of the questions I had was, is it different to be an audience member as opposed to someone who is watching the film? And I think a similar thing, a relationship can be said for this game if you're playing it in English versus in the original Japanese. So, yeah, complicated non-answer, I guess. Yeah.
I would like to add regarding like the authorship device in games, and I think that in creation in general now with AI changing or the conception on making, it's like I believe that there's a huge opportunity to resist the strong authorial device that it's part of the tradition that comes from other fields and ways of expression, like in like video games started like having their like director of things, like trying to have the translation of cinema and trying to validate itself as a high form of culture, or at least valid in comparison with the other ones. So there's a need. Then there's like this market interest on trying to create an industry, and it's easier to label with authors, and not only authors. And that's interesting in games, that also the studio, it's like a big thing. Even though we know that there's people there, and that studios that look like rock solid for like a decade then turn into a strange thing like Blizzard or other like interesting cases that we can examine. In my case, I'm really interested to open source and thinking on how those practices can help to recognize the whole people, not only the ones that are even in the making, also in not even like some like really not recognized processes of like the testing, where like if you have made something and you show that to someone, and those early feedbacks like really change and give shape to your experience. And I do games, and those testings and looking at our people playing, it's like huge. And it's like, I can't say that that's mine if this is like a really collective thing. And I believe that we're in a time where there's an opportunity to try to explore like other ways to approach to authorship. There are like, I know that it's important, especially for indies, to try to do that. There's this game Balatro that it's like the game of the year now, that it's like pretty fun and break a lot of things. And the author, it's anonymous. And that's like an interesting gesture, like also Seasons, A Letter to the Future. I feel that a great thing that they're doing is that at the end of the game, the credits are not like the traditional model of like that comes from cinema to try to validate like this way. It's like you see the names, you don't see like the specific roles, like this is the director. So I'm trying also to track, I'm really thinking about this. So I'm starting to track like those starting actions to see like what we can do, especially now with AI is changing everything.
I just had a contribution in that conversation because I thought that this conversation on authorship is also to be contrasted with the technological constraints of the medium or the specific generation of video games that we are talking about. Because I thought in terms of, back to the example of NPCs, is like the authorial vision is not necessarily what is being picked up by these new dancers. It's not necessarily in terms of the plot or the narrative or the concepts of the video game, but rather they are tackling and they are focusing on the flaws of the specific titles. In this case, it's very evident that they are referencing The Sims or GTA, and it's not necessarily about the concepts of the plots in those games, but rather how uncanny they move, or the impossibilities of these figures to be able to fully mimic human behavior on corporeal terms, of course.
Thank you all very much for your wonderful talks, and I loved how you all have very clearly intertwined concepts, but are approaching them all from different angles. All three of your talks together got me to think about thwarting messages oppositional to like hegemonic forces. This crystallized for me thinking about Waman Polma's letter never reaching its destination in their lifetime, and how a lot of times messages about new ways of thinking of the world, new ways of envisioning relations of power to people are thwarted before they can reach their destination. And I think each of your projects touch on this a little bit. And so I wonder if you would, ruminate on how you see that sort of thwarting happening either in your works or in the things you study, and then also, so how do we outdo that? How do we thwart the thwarting? How do we make sure our messages get to their audience? How do we break through and make sure people realize there are other possibilities of seeing the world, of making the world, of being the world? I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I am thinking here of, in my case, I will answer to that question through a speculation, and something that has been productive for me to be able to intertwine an artistic practice based on performance and then the theoretical investigation that I was sharing here. And so thinking of these lineages of these messages that are being picked up on different times and also on different terms, and not necessarily, as I was saying, in terms of the plot, but maybe the aesthetics of it will be picked up. And that's the message that it's being recovered, right? And in terms of the research that I'm working on, I'm thinking of the choreographic or the kinetic qualities that are being picked up and by later generations. And so just 2 weeks ago, we came up with a performance called Biokineem. And it was, of course, based on the ideas of this talk, but playing with a more performative methodology. And what we did is we were having dancers moving on top of mud, and we had geneticists from the biology department coming and scrapping their feet to take samples of it and put them on petri dishes. And what we thought, based on the speculation, is what kind of bacteria or viruses or substances could emerge from that by harvesting that. And we were thinking, is there a way that through a specific treatment of those samples, we could recover the choreographic material of those bodies and their sweat? So just to say, in my case, I've been thinking of those lineages and how information is being transmitted, but very much through this method of speculation, right? But also intertwined with scientific methods, I guess.
I strongly believe that thinking on the process, it's part of how we can also expand the reach idea of this kind of project. Like when I just encountered the archive of Waman, I felt like a deep urgency to do something with this. And it's not like I have probably I have like 1 or 2 contacts of distance to get to the king, the current king, probably in Spain, to send him the letter. But it's not probably what I needed to do. And since I'm really into the making, and probably my background also as like doing ethnography, and I understand how like the result is not the only thing. It's like also the impact of the process as a whole. That's how like this whole Andean Futures initiative turned into something as powerful or having like a huge impact that it's like intertwined, creating like a net of impact and outreach, and that can foster things that we are not expecting to. And it's like letting grow like the bacteria in those like samples and see what happens, but being like really intentional with that. So it's like focusing on that, collaborating with people and with communities. And in this case, it's like, luckily in the US or in Canada, there are like more experiences where indigenous communities have engaged with game production and creation, not only as like cultural consultants, but also like actually doing games from the communities. In Latin America, sadly, there's no those many, and it's not like, oh, okay, so I wanted to research this and there's nothing. So it's like I had to be like put my grain here to see what happens, and if they want, if they don't want, and who are they? It's not like a day that they're just one thing. So I think I really believe that we need to pay attention to those process and speculate those impacts and see what happens. And at least in my experience, it has. And it's like maybe the letter didn't go to the king for maybe this game, but this game was exhibited in Denmark by the team of the Royal Danish Library. So at least it got to where the manuscript it's held till this day. So we're like step by step getting to that guy.
I really think play is radical, and I think games are really important to try to imagine us out of systems that aren't working for us anymore. I mentioned dream work very, very briefly in my presentation from Sora Han's Letters of the Law, but the whole point of the term dream work is to suggest that critical legal studies can't yet articulate a solution because no one has imagined it yet. And I feel like a lot of our problems are because no one has imagined it yet. So games are this like third space where we construct worlds that sometimes are disparate from the rules, societal rules, social rules, professional rules that we have. And sometimes unknowingly they slip in anyway. But I think they're really important, especially for maybe a game that is trying to sometimes critique and sometimes more realistically illustrate law, like Ace Attorney, because it is a Japanese game. I lived and worked in Tokyo, Japan for a while. And I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm used to being very loud and opinionated about controversial opinions. And I learned really quickly over there that that's not socially acceptable, that you don't talk about sexism unless you're extremely close with that individual. You don't talk about racism unless you're extremely close. So oftentimes these discussions are veiled and they're subtle and they're translated through symbols. And that pops up in this game too. So there are some characters that I am so sure are supposed to be brown or black, but did not render as such because they were trying to avoid some kind of controversial claim for people that were playing these games, especially Westerners that were witnessing the localized versions. But in doing so, they create more tension for people who want to talk about it. So I think we need more people to play games, not to just like rev up our whole panel, but we really do. We need people to critique games that aren't doing what they should be doing when you have conversations on games. And if we do that, I think we can maybe imagine a way out of some of these systems and play at the same time.
Oh, sorry. I think there's a question online that I want to make sure that we address. Nope, that was just a reminder that I could ask questions.
Thank you all so much for your presentations. I'm like, my brain is buzzing now thinking about all of this. I had seen the NPC videos before, and I was always so struck with how the like movement of it is so distinctive because it is from this algorithmic attempt to respond to the player's movement and respond to the player's freedom and create an atmosphere around them. And I think this is really, really interesting looking at the other two games discussed in this panel. I've heard people refer to the Ace Attorney games as visual novel-like with fixed endings. And while you have freedom to select certain things through, there is a specific narrative that you're following, despite maybe getting a game over, maybe selecting the wrong piece of evidence. And I haven't played Hawk and Puma, but I'm interested because it sounds like you really develop a very specific narrative experience and through line, and you're getting your vision across. So I'm wondering if y'all have thoughts on like the role of the player and player agency, which we heard in like the first talk on yesterday, how this fits into your work and like maybe how each work responds to it differently, if that makes sense.
Thank you for your question. That's a great question because Hawk and Puma, it's a minimal game, and it was intended to be like that. And it's a linear narrative, but even though like there's a lot of discussions in games, like no, how much is the agency? How much agency do you need to really be a game? And like all those discussions, I like it's interactive. People are playing. For me, that's a game, and they're playing, and that's awesome. I wanted to do it simply in this case because I wanted to have like an outreach impact of Woman's work, to be an homage to Woman's life, and also to put this speculative dialogue into play, because are like open questions that I have, and I really needed to do something with them. And watching people playing, even if it's a linear experience, you have like a moment in the beginning where you can go up to see, like, to learn about Waman, in case that you don't know anything about him. So it's like a quipu that was like a nothing written three-dimensional system in the Inca region, and you can explore like Waman's quipu. So like, what's a quipu? The quipu and about Waman. So you have a kind of that interactive documentary or museum, and then you go to the main story, or you can just go straight to it. And when I see people playing, it's like there are like many things that you can interact with, and there's a lot of agency on like deciding what to do with that. Like, do you want to interact with that? There are parts that are like more like relaxed and like to contemplate the art, or a little bit silly, but there's a lot of moments that it's like really hard to go over that. And it's like you have like depictions of violence. There's a content warning in the description because of that, because it's the story and it's how Woman was like drawing and writing it. And I know how much agency there is in a linear experience on watching people playing. Some people just like trying to do it quickly. Some people like getting lost in a particular moment where I really wanted them to feel like this claustrophobic experience, and other times that they want to interact with things and just like playing around in this linear narrative. And some people just like exploring it in a really intellectual way, and other people's like in an emotional way. So from people just like, oh, this is so cool, and some people like crying and like, thank you for putting this into a game. So there's a lot of agency. Thank you.
This question is very interesting to me. Thank you for that. Because I'm considering this notion of agency in very spatial and physical ways. And so, as I mentioned in the paper, we go a little bit more in detail in contrasting these different artistic developments or styles or aesthetics with this specific moments or developments in the industrialization process, right? So when it comes to this cinematic gaze that we were mentioning, it was rehearsed in the slaughterhouse. You have this left to right, this sequentialization of images, this stitching of images. But when it comes to the train, you also have that. You also have this recombination, this violent recombination of images. But I'm interested in thinking, when you're in the train, the person that is controlling how you travel and therefore how those images get to be presented to you is far removed from you. When it comes to the slaughterhouse, you see a person, at least in the room, controlling how those platforms are moving and therefore how the show is being experienced. And then when it comes to the video game, the controls finally land on your hands. So you are the one that is stitching these images together. And so I'm thinking in those spatialized and physical forms of agency, or modifications of agency, or evolutions of agency, because I see a parallel in these artistic or aesthetic developments in terms of how corporeal they are. So when it comes to cubism and futurism, as we were saying with the 20th century avant-garde movements in painting, these are images, right? And the cinematic gaze is also about images in a film. But when it comes to the NPC aesthetic, finally is embodied. So the image that is inspiring this aesthetic transformation is taken by the body and inside of the body. So just to put those into parallel.
For Phoenix Wright, it's a little weird. It definitely is a kind of visual novel, but I would I would argue that what's interesting about using the video game medium is there's like checkpoints for your understanding, right? So if someone were reading Sherlock Holmes to you and then stopped right in the middle and slammed the book down and was like, do you know what happened? Have you figured it out yet? We would be like, no, you're ruining my experience. So I think there are some mediums that you're meant to listen to. Video games isn't one of them. Video games are asking for your reply, right? And so in that case, I think agency in Phoenix Wright and in detective and deductive video games are really testing your skill in specific strategies. Sometimes those are like dungeons, sometimes those are puzzles, sometimes those are like logic strains, and sometimes it's just taking a risk and flying with it and seeing if the creator was crazy enough to make you put a parrot on the stand. You know what I mean? So agency looks really different for a lot of games, but I think Phoenix Wright also takes from older detective video games that really like the visual novel, because I think they were trying to translate what an interactive film might look like. So we're getting further away from that, but that relationship still does exist.
And do we have time for the last question there? Or?
Yeah, we'll make this the last question.
Okay.
This question's for Luna specifically. You mentioned in the game, there's like not a lot of Black characters, or if they were Black characters, they got washed out in the production of it. With the like use of Patricia's work specifically, or Dr. Williams, sorry. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. In the book specifically, there's like concepts like living ghosts, people that experience violence or racial like discrimination that aren't believed in the story. I'm wondering how you feel about the interplay between like ghosts standing trial in the Ace Attorney game, where Black people in real life who are living and experience something aren't believed, and like how that might play into the fact that like current Black media often has like Black ghosts haunting Black characters. And if you have any opinions on that, I'm so curious.
I have so many opinions. And this is like, I would love to see an alternate universe where this game was developed in the US. Because I think that's a completely different game. I think representation would look different. I think specific movements would be called out during these cases. These games aren't like set in a fictional timeline. Like you can tell by the technology they're using. This is the 80s. This is the 90s. We're in the 2000s now. And it kind of like doesn't pay attention to lots of aspects in race. So I like using this game series as like a framing device to unravel how sticky it is to not represent people that are kind of living through this exact unimagining in a weird way, because it's all still there. It's just the developers got a little worried and scared, and maybe it was a little too controversial, but the players aren't scared and the players want to know. So that's why like my methodology is a little strange, because it takes a lot of media, and I kind of like look around at certain objects to try to figure out what we're collectively looking at. And that's where the other games I mentioned and the TV shows become really interesting places to like discover how Blackness is being talked about in video games versus other media. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to all of you.